Hey everybody, welcome back to another movie review. Hope you guys been enjoying the content on the channel as of late. Just before we start, just wanted to kind of give you guys a little backstory on this video. Initially, I recorded this as we usually do in my car, because if you guys, follow this channel, I usually do out of the theater type reactions. So I just, film my thoughts literally in my car because they're all fresh in my mind, and then I just go off and upload that video. Well, my editor, my software had an update, and I guess the update, does not enjoy the type of files that my phone has anymore. So we may have to scrap doing the phone videos from now on and squarely use my camera, which is for the better because we got better quality here. But I prefer to do the out of theater type reaction just because I keep my thoughts all intact. But luckily, I also keep a journal of some of my thoughts, so at least I can kind of work from that, and it's still fairly fresh in my mind. But just so if you're wondering why I'm kind of going through this review a little bit more quicker, it's just because I've already talked about this. But it's still an interesting piece to talk about, so it's worth talking about again. So that film we're going to discuss is The Room Next Door, which was written and directed by Pedro Almodovar. I think that's how I say his name. Notable filmmaker, done some films recently that's garnished some praise and some attention. Some films including Pain and Glory, which starred Antonio Banderas, and following from that, the film Parallel Mothers, which starred Penelope Cruz. This stars Tilda Swinton and Julianne Moore, and the two of which are playing, I would say, distant friends who then reunite through very tragic and unfortunate circumstances. But to set it up properly, Julianne Moore, who, just so I get the names, because, well, I didn't actually have the names correct in the initial review, so I guess it's good that I'm re-recording it, But Julianne Moore's character, Ingrid, she is an author, and she recently has published a book in regards to the concept of death. And while she was at a book signing, a colleague and acquaintance of sorts gives her word that a old friend of hers named Martha is in the hospital, and she rushes to the hospital and finds Martha in a very ill state, and the form of which is unfortunately that of terminal cancer. And she is trying some new treatments, and those treatments unfortunately are not working out for her, and she is basically given at least a year or so to live. And as she is dealing and ultimately sitting with that, she comes to a very extreme conclusion as to how to deal with such a thing, which is to end her own life. And she proposes this idea to Ingrid, and the two of which go to a house in the woods, a very luxurious architect type building, and they stay there. And the rules are, at least to how Martha lays it out to Ingrid, is that she is to be, just make it as like it's vacation, because there's a real world element at play, because of her involvement in what's happening. She can get, there's an investigation that can open up against her and all the other things. So to make it so that she doesn't have to get into all that mess, she tells her that when the door, because they're going to be in two separate rooms, when my door is closed, you will have known that it has happened. When the door is open, then it has not happened yet. And she is to stay in, as the movie is called, The Room Next Door. And the film chronicles the, or not chronicles, but ultimately portrays people's viewpoint of that of death, and ultimately how people deal with the gravity of such a thing. And in the case of this, I think that they take it in a more rudimentary form of perspective. It's not just in the literal of how one deals with the the concept of death, or in this case of Tilda Swinton, inevitable death very, very soon. It's really to do with a state of mind, and I think that what the contrast between the two, between Julianne Moore and Tilda Swinton, is a lot to do with how they deal with things, emotionally speaking. In the case of Tilda Swinton, she is that of the cynic. She's someone who has very much so has laid out her view of the world, and that's the view that she is sticking with. She also shares that sort of mentality with the other actor here, which is John Turturro, who's a lot more passionate in his view, a lot more politically charged, as the film also provides that some other texturing, with some political commentary, some social commentary, and it's to illustrate people who have already accepted that the world will end someday, and that their view is like this. People are this, people are that. They have made up their minds, and that's just how they are seeing the world. Whereas Julianne Moore, she's more of the optimist, and she's the person who wishes to see a silver lining in anything that she does, and ultimately does try to keep to a youthful spirit. And I think that a really great scene that presents that is when she goes to the gym and she's working with a young trainer, and she tries to keep up with him. Reality sets in that she is older and she's not able to manage as much as he is, and it's just, I think that what the film does really well in that showcase is to rely upon a very non-verbal demeanor. And when I say that, is that it's through depiction. It's not to where the film has to spell it out for you in certain aesthetic or certain visuals, or with the characters having to literally say something like, oh, I'm too old, or I'm too fragile. Like, they don't play on that sort of mentality. It's very, very subtle. And I think that it really enriches a lot of the environment and a lot of the literal things that are in the frame, specifically that of these performances, which are already very solid on their own, particularly that of Tilda Swinton, who I think is always just dynamite. She's always magnificent, and she's great in this. She is always great in everything that she does, and I think that she is, again, great here, because she really portrays the feeling of acceptance. She captures that so well within her character. There's something very, very gentle, but also very sharp about her. She's very direct. She doesn't sugarcoat things. She doesn't play mind games. She's just very, very much her own deal. And within the case of what's happening with her, you completely understand why she is that way. Julianne Moore's also great, playing the counterpoint to that. Someone who is a little bit more optimistic, someone who's trying to provide the levity, provide provide a more youthful edge, trying to find a way to make things not seem as real or as dark as they actually are. And I think that duo, that working together, I think is very, very great, especially with the thematic study that is behind them. It actually, I think, really gives those performances a lot of weight. And the dialogue also, which I think is very meaningful, and it gives a, I think when the film needs to, I think it gives more, understandings to what its subjects or its subject matter is. And other times it doesn't rely upon that dialogue. It relies more on just a simplicity of frame, simplicity of a visual, of, again, something like Julianne Moore working at the gym. That, just that alone gives you a lot of idea of what they're trying to address without actually having to speak it out loud. And then there's other times where it needs to speak out loud, and it appropriately so. And generally, and by aesthetic also, it's just great. I mean, like I said, when they get to that house, it's very, very architect. There's a lot of, interesting looks within that house and outside of the house and the forest. I mean, generally speaking, it's a great looking film, and you get really great performances to supply it, some good dialogue to play along with it. What it does bring it down a little bit for me is a lot to do with its style and its choice of overall design in terms of how it is framed, because I thought it was deliberate in that how it plays to Tilda Swinton's character, because Tilda Swinton's character is rather descending, deteriorating, because her memory is also deteriorating, and she makes a point about that in the film. And I thought that the film was playing on that. I thought that the film ultimately, with its sharp cuts to where we have Tilda Swinton and Julianne Moore talking in one room, and then that conversation stops halfway through, and then we're in another room. I thought that that might have been an illustration of Tilda Swinton's mindset, but that extends outside of that, and it creates a lingering sense of doubt within that such a choice, and it's unfortunately validated. It just doesn't have a clear sense of why it is having to have a jarring sensibility within the edits, within the cutting of it, of going from one place to another and stopping halfway through these conversations to then be in another room. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't know if that's just Pedro's style, generally speaking, because I'm not familiar with his filmmaking. This is my first of his films, actually, so maybe that's a fault of me not knowing his filmmaking. But as far as I can tell, based on seeing some reviews that I had just watched, it doesn't appear to be that way. But maybe I'm mistaken. But that stands. I found myself pretty enjoyed by it. There's, someone put it best. Mark Kamat, actually, I watched his review. I think he kind of put it best, where it does feel rather stagey in terms of how the dialogue plays, and in terms of the isolative nature of its overall circumstance, with just these two squarely with Tilda Swinton and Julianne Moore for a large period of time. There is a theatric element to it, but thankfully that doesn't make it artificial. It doesn't make it feel out of place. It doesn't feel like, oh, I feel like we should be sitting in a different type of auditorium for this. It does still feel cinematic. It still feels earnest, and at some points resonant, not as heavy on the resonance as I would want it to be, but still some of it is there, thankfully, to do with those performances, as I've mentioned, and the dialogue, so there's an interesting study here. There's an interesting study within the idea of cynicism, within the ideas of optimism, the duality, just those two floating ideas at play. I found myself in good company with it, and there are choices in it that I also feel will turn some people off, specifically towards the end. There's a choice that's made that I won't spoil what it is, but it definitely echoes of that. If you're familiar with Tilda Swinton's filmography, it definitely will echo that of The Eternal Daughter, which I've done a review on this channel. Immediately when it happened, I was like, oh, that's The Eternal Daughter. Like obviously that's The Eternal Daughter. But in the case of the film, in overall what it's addressing, talking about the dealings of acceptance as the end approaches, ghosts that haunt our present, the choice makes perfect sense to me when it happens. It makes a lot of sense when it happened. So for some people, it might be a bit of a distraction, but for me, it actually is pretty reflective of the themes that are at play and the general perspectives that are being fleshed out. So I found it enjoyable. I thought it was a good piece. I enjoyed its company. I enjoyed the performances. I enjoyed the general just study of its ideas. I find it to be very fascinating. And I think it's bold in the overall just plot, in terms of what it literally is about someone taking their own life. I think that there's a very some boldness, some challenges even, in the discussions of death and how one wishes to complete their story, I guess you could say, or to find some peace. What does that mean for some, and for some people? And the film kind of challenges that, and I find that to be interesting. So it's good. It's not without fault, as I said. I think that some of the style can be questionable, and generally it can interfere with some of the resonance that is trying to be supplied. But generally, by performance, by dialogue, by what it is literally talking about, by how it fleshes these ideas out, it's still a very interesting piece, and I think one definitely worth checking out when you have time. So yeah, those are my thoughts on The Room Next Door. I thought it was pretty good. I had a good time with it. Like I said, not great, but definitely pretty good, in my opinion. But You guys want your thoughts? Oh, there goes my screen. You guys want your thoughts on The Room Next Door? If you guys have seen it, and your thoughts on Pedro's previous work. I'm not familiar with any of his, like I said. Never seen Pain and Glory, never seen Parallel Mothers or his other films. So if you guys are familiar with his work, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Does this stack up, or is this kind of a lesser film? Should I check out his other films, I want to say Pain and Gain, but I mean Pain and Glory, and Parallel Mothers? Let me know if I should check those out. Would be curious to see Pain and Glory. I've don't know much about Parallel Mothers, but let me know all your thoughts in the comment section below. And that's gonna be it for this video, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in, and until then, I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye.